Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us. Good morning to you, Ashish.
Good morning.
And I think we're going to have Mr. Nayar in just a bit. But that was an extremely interesting conversation. And I think Padmaja, along with the minister, have really set the stage for us to take the conversation forward when it comes to the education field, Ashish. But let's start off by talking about where we are today.
Sure.
And I think one of the biggest collateral damages of the pandemic that we don't often talk about has been education.
Yep.
Education across the board, across the world. And while it may not hit us immediately now, but in the coming few years, it's going to be an extremely big challenge in terms of how it impacts our children, how it's impacted the way younger lot today, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 10-year-olds are being taught, and whether we've been able to adapt in the right way. Now, it's also an opportunity for us to relook at the way we do impart our education.
Absolutely.
And perhaps bring in the systems that should have been here, but maybe this can be the chance to do that. So let's talk a little bit about your view on the current scenario and what companies like Square Panda can actually do.
So you're absolutely right? Through the pandemic, the children not only lost 1 year of learning, but several years of development, right? Because there is a lot of development associated with each year of learning that they have. Having digital education would have helped, right? If we were able to implement these systems sooner. And obviously, we couldn't predict you would have pandemic, but if the systems did exist, at least some of the education could be given to these children while they were at home. Obviously, the metro cities still were able to do that, but when you went into rural areas, tribal areas, etc., these children had nothing. I mean, they were just home for 1 full year. So not only education, but even social development suffered a lot, right? Because they weren't interacting with other children that much. They were interacting with other teachers, etc. So there was a huge loss, but companies like Square Panda can bring that ability to learn from anywhere, right? On a phone, on a tablet, on a PC. And I think, going towards the future, we don't know if another pandemic of sorts can arrive, and I think this is a needed solution. I mean, in a country like India, if we can get this across the country, I think this would be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, and which is why I believe this can be the turning point, right? In the way India takes it forward from here. Good morning to you, Mr. Nayar. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, Vineet, then let's start off, and if you would want to weigh in on this as well, to what Ashish was saying, your view of the current scenario of education in our country, and what foundations like Sampark or companies like Square Panda can actually do to revolutionize the way we are teaching our children.
So I come from a different point of view because Sampark Foundation is working with 84,000 schools in the poorest part of India, and all of them government schools. And the suffering and the pain in those schools is significantly, it's 10 times more than what we have seen in the urban area. And the magnitude of the pain and the magnitude of the impact COVID has created is still to be understood. Because when the children come back to school, the question is, will they come back to school or would they get into employment? Because there is a financial distress. If they come back to school, do we start with class 1 or would they have forgotten everything, and where do we start? And number 3, would there be a keen interest to learn? Because we cannot start from square one. So therefore, this is a time for us to have disruptive, inclusive innovation to transform the social sector around education of the kind and scale we have never seen before. And organizations like Sampark Foundation is doing a lot of work on digital and on physical to try and transform the way the education is delivered. One thing to me is very clear, that the divide between the have and have-nots is the bane of the problem in India. And with for-profit edtech companies coming in, the divide is only increasing. So while I congratulate all the high investments which is coming in edtech area, I'm a little skeptical that with that kind of valuations coming in edtech and and edtech becoming for profit, the divide between have and have-nots is only going to increase. And therefore, we should be a bit careful while celebrating edtech. Edtech is a phenomenal solution to solve our problem, but edtech for profit, if does not get controlled, will increase the divide and not decrease the divide.
That is actually a big conversation point right now, Ashish. The divide between the haves and the have-nots intensified by the pandemic. Do you want to respond to what Vineet is saying about that word of caution there?
Absolutely, and I agree with them, actually. One of our concentrations, or actually our major concentration, are the rural tribal areas of the country, right? We are, as an edtech company, we don't even look at the metros as our prime market. We want to make an impact, right? At the end of the day, yes, we're for profit, but impact is a much bigger goal for us than just that profitability, right? So can we balance the two? And agreeing with Vineet, sir, but we are looking at exactly those markets and those sectors. So yes, there may be tech companies that look at only valuation, but no, for us, it is also about impact and how many millions of kids can we actually impact with the solutions that we provide.
So probably a balanced approach to this, or to ensure that profit making doesn't take precedence over anything else, would be to say you collaborate together with the public participation. So you look at what an established public government setup can do, how they can create an environment, but you look towards the private sector to really take it to the next level. So at the end of the day, we're talking about a partnership between the two. How do you envisage that playing out? What should we be looking for?
So, I mean, the private sector obviously brings innovation, right? That's one of the reasons that the private sector survives, because if you don't innovate, you're going to go away. So bringing that innovation, solutions, et cetera, to this market, bringing the efficiency of rolling out these big projects, right? Because in a country our size, it's not only going to be about the solution, it's not going to be about the good intent, but if we don't have the ability to actually execute, we're not going to get the solution out there. So the private sector, when they combine with, let's say, Vineet sir's organization and with the government, are probably together, we can go much faster, much quicker, and provide better solutions to those children out there.
Vineet, I don't know if you were able to hear the last conversation with the education minister here, who spoke about the new NEP policy and what the government really intends to do or has as a larger vision. But in the new NEP, as the way it's been presented, do you think it does the trick of the kind of changes we want in the way we want to teach the children? He spoke a lot about, emphasis on, and that's there in the NEP, emphasis on the use of mother tongue for little children, because when you are, when their mind is evolving, it's a little vulnerable, it's always better to speak in their mother tongue, in the regional language. From that to curriculum, are we headed in the right direction? And do you see a public-private way forward in that scenario?
I think, from a pure statement of intent point of view, it is bold, it is visionary, and it sets a goal pretty high of what should be the education policy of the country. And I think it is a step or 10 steps in the right direction. What I worry about is what is the facts on the ground. The facts on the ground is that most children coming to our schools have their first meal as midday meal. Most schools lack infrastructure. Most schools' teachers are not well qualified, well trained, well motivated. The infrastructure doesn't exist. So forget about this language or that language. Hardly any education takes place in those schools, predominantly because you can see it in learning outcomes, right? With 70–80% of the children in grade 5 in government schools not being able to count beyond 99 or construct simple sentences in the local language. So where we wish to go, our vision is very compelling, very, very clearly defined. The goals are big. But where we are today is very painful. That is the reason I quit HCL and founded Sampark Foundation to try and bring about a change at the grassroots level. The problem at the grassroots level is very large. the amount of resources and the amount of innovation and the amount of execution and the amount of commitment education would need to move from this point to the vision defined in NEP is a long road. And that would need private investment, that would need private innovators, that would need new ideas to come in, that would need significant increase in government spending in education, that would need connection between education spending and political votes so that people can win elections based on the amount of investment they're making in education. It would need all these changes for the NEP to really fructify into the vision it really promises or it professes. And the last is, yes, the private sector has a role to play in this. But what I worry about is when we do not allow IITs and IIMs to go out and create valuations for themselves, or DPS or modern school to create valuation for themselves, why do we allow these edtech companies to create these massive billion-dollar valuations, which only increases the have and have-not divide, which is exactly what happened in Kota with these coaching schools and with all kinds of coaching schools, so that all the people who could afford coaching will get into these IIMs and IITs. Exactly the same thing is being repeated all over the place. So while NEP is a good idea, we also need to bring some kind of these edtech for-profit initiatives under some kind of control and umbrella so that the divide between the have and have-nots is not increased, or take the money from the haves, if that's the kind of money people want to spend on education, take some of that and park that back into the bottom of the pyramid education. That way, the vision of NEP will become faster to execute than, in my experience, what is happening on the ground today.
So actually, if I can just follow up with the question there, instead of saying that stop the profit-making, edtech companies, why not ask the government to empower the ones which are working for the have-nots, or which are working in the field to make it a level playing field? Why not ask the government to also bring in entities or partner with entities who can then ensure that those who are competing with the quota-trained IIT, ambition students are on the same platform? Rather than curbing one side, why not empower the other? Question to you, Vineet.
Is that question to me?
Yes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yes, that is exactly what we should do. We should leverage them. We should, and I think Square Panda is exactly, his answer was that we should encourage them that not to focus on for-profit, and there has to be an element. Their content needs to be given free, or whatever it is. Some kind of balance needs. Yes, we should leverage them, but we should force them. For example, what does Delhi schools do? 25% of seats are reserved for people who cannot afford it. Fantastic idea, right? So you are saying, okay, schools, you can charge whatever fee you want, but 25% of the students have to be educated free for you, and you have to give them uniform. So exactly those kind of policies will have to come back. So I am for-profit education. I have no problems, because unless capital is invested, education will not transform. However, that capital investment in creation of that wealth has to be within a framework so that we can divert it. This is exactly the reason of our fight against Facebook on free basic, right? So if we do not allow free basic of Facebook, rightly so, and we are fighting with WhatsApp on privacy, we should, whenever education becomes for profit, there has to be some governing rule so that it is available to all and not available to few. Yes, all the innovation will come because of capital, but that capital has to be diverted so that more people gain from it, rather than it becomes a source of profiting out of India's aspiration of becoming great. And then the same thing, people who can afford will get into IITs and IIMs, and people who can't afford will stay back, which is exactly the problem in our school. And the minister also said, all the people who can afford also afford to go out for their higher education and work for multinationals. So the talent is also not retained in India. So we have to broaden the pyramid in the organization, and these companies with this kind of capital should be the source of innovation and should take the responsibility of uplifting the rest of the country, because they are making so much money. They should share that content, technology, whatever it is, they should share that with the rest so that as a country as a whole develops.
Fair enough. I think, Ashish, one thing that all of us will agree on is that the new education policy that the government's brought up is largely still a vision document.
Yes.
A lot of it, the nuances and nitty-gritties have to be followed up with and then implemented. Now, so here is your chance to, I mean, if you had to have a conversation with the government, the bureaucrats, the policymakers today, what would your advice be? How to define it, especially in the field of, say, primary education? And I'm not just talking about what you're giving to the children, but the curriculum, the back end, the teachers.
So you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a vision that will need an execution, right? That's the point I've been saying multiple times. And again, my request to the government is that involve the innovative, research-based private players early on, right? Let us bring what knowledge and experiences we already have, right? And it doesn't have to be a chargeable thing, right? And maybe Vineet says, right, you don't charge for your knowledge, but bring that to the table today so that we can actually execute this faster, right? Otherwise, we'll be spending years planning, executing, and by the time we get there and I don't even say complete, we're again going to need another cycle of it, right? So the request is that you involve the research and the experiences from the private side early enough so we can start executing faster. One thing I do want to echo from Vineet sir, just as a thing, as part of this policy, the whole thing about the educators being empowered and upskilled is probably your first and prime focus, right? Nothing is going to be successful unless they themselves have been upskilled, right? Like sir said, if you can give them whatever tools you want,
right,
it's not going to work unless they themselves understand how to use it and what the benefits are for using it.
Yes, unless they know how to use it and how to actually use it for the betterment of the children. We're completely out of time. Thank you so much, Mr. Vineet Nayar. Thank you, Ashish, for joining us here. I think everybody can agree that in the field of education, with the new policy, the intent's there. Now it's time to